neoliberal can be quite deceptive, right? And sure, I mean, when we think of Singapore's authoritarianism, particularly in the earlier decades, right, it's very clearly configured in a particular kind of way. It's a very strong, kind of top-down paternalistic state that has monopolized basically uh, kind of talent and resources in order to make decisions on people's behalf. And the social compact there is that people are meant to be happy with that, right? But the being satisfied and happy and therefore apathetic leads to a kind of infantilization, right? So that sort of notion of authoritarianism is, yeah, the paternalistic a father who makes all the decisions, and then an infantilized people who, even though they become middle class by the mid 80s, actually are pretty comfortable to leave politics to leadership, to leaders, right? Rather than kind of insert their own voices and think alternative. So it's not the same kind of model as modernization theory would have suggested. So that model is quite different, I think, from the neoliberal kind of authoritarianism, which I think could be suitably described as a neo-authoritarian stage, right? Where we know that markets, in spite of their centrality in neoliberal globalization, are actually pretty fragile. You actually need states to make them work, right? You actually need states to suppress certain things in order for the market and the prime beneficiaries of the market to succeed. So I think that's really the point where we start to understand why this actually authoritarian. It's actually a kind of partnership between an elite, the political elite, with capital in that market, right? Capital that flows at a global level and invades, if not pervades, local economies. So, if you read it this way, you start to understand why labor unions are the way that they are in Singapore, right? And you start to understand why we don't want to we don't want to put too many rights and privileges or sort of make them available for the labor force, the workers in Singapore, because here is a partnership that says, and this is the ideological sort of equation, right? You want economic growth. That's, you got to have it, right? That's the preeminent goal, uncompromisable goal. To get that, you need foreign investment. To get foreign capital to come into Singapore, Singapore must be conducive to that, which means you can't have labor that's demanding too many, salaries that are high, or demanding rights and privileges that makes it harder or makes Singapore less attractive to foreign. So, to get that going, you need a pretty strong state to do that. And I think that's the nature of the authoritarianism in Singapore today. It's a neo-authoritarianism that's not so much to do with jailing people or suing people or whatever, but it's more, it uses much more sophisticated sort of approaches of social and political control. They're sometimes just kind of atmospheric, or they take the form of incentive structures, right? Nudges even are a kind of authoritarian expression that masks itself behind the liberality of neoliberalism. So because technocracy really promises efficient and effective results, right? Nobody dislikes the sound of that, right? But what's hidden by that promise is the way that it is done, which is that it is done in an ivory tower by elite, highly qualified people who more than likely come from a particular class location, right? To the exclusion of the vast majority of people who live very different lives, who experience life differently, right? And whose problems and concerns may be framed quite differently. But those voices kept out of the ivory tower are not included. So the logic of technocracy is actually the achievement of effective, efficient results through the exclusion of messy experiences and messy voices, so that you can sit down and technically plot solutions. And then with the absence of political obstacles, social obstacles, you can roll them out and expect to see results just as you've plotted them out on a piece of paper,
Yeah.
right? And so why do people accept that even when the results don't seem to benefit them directly? It has a lot to do, I think, with the ideological framing of these things, right? So instead of paternalism, instead of we exclude you because your voices are worthless or destructive or mischievous or short-sighted. Well, instead of saying it that way, you say, well, this is the compact, right? You contract out that task to us, and we who are skilled to do this will do it and deliver you the results that you want. It works for as long as it works, right? But when the results kind of stop coming in the way that people expect it to, then the compact starts to fray a little bit.
Got you.
And that's, I think, a moment where the authoritarianism starts to be threatened. And that's where you might start to see the old type of authoritarianism come back in, which is the kind of more harsh, brutal approaches to critics and alternative voices.